All right. Well, today we have another exciting episode in the saga of the Judges. So let's start with the prayer that we've been using every week, and then we'll move right into chapter 9. Pray with me. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who is faithful even when your people are faithless, who is mighty to redeem when your people are weak in every way, who is even now working to set all things right and inviting us to participate in that. Teach us your ways, O Lord, as we study your word. Let it reshape us. Make us holy as you are holy. Amen. Okay, we're in chapter 9 today. Last week, we looked at Gideon. You'll recall a fearful man who learned to trust God and followed God's direction, redeeming his people from the scourge of the Midianites. They were hordes of desert nomads on camels who flooded into the valley for 7 years straight, just at harvest time, stole all the crops, all the harvest, all the animals, and left the people of Israel destitute, starving. And then we looked at the great stories of Gideon and his battles. Some of the best stories in the Bible. But we ended with the stories of Gideon's missteps. You may remember that after his defeat of the enemies, he refused to be king, but then he collected tribute from the people, a gold ring from each man, and made a golden ephod that then people worshiped. Uh, yeah, that's a sermon there. And then he married many wives, said he had 70 sons, and it noted at the end of the story that he had a Canaanite concubine in Shechem, and she had a son named Abimelech. Today, in chapter 9, we pick up, and this is kind of a PS to the story of Gideon, kind of a coda, if you will. So here's Abimelech, the son of this Canaanite concubine. Now, let me issue an alert. We're going to look at Abimelech for a few minutes, and then I'm going to be asking for questions, and I'm going to be looking for you to make comments. So uh, we might prepare a microphone, and everybody clear your throats and be prepared to participate in class this week. The last 2 weeks, I haven't let you talk. So this week, I'm going to be looking to hear from you. So, chapter 9, here's this story of Abimelech. And we're not going to look at it in great detail, but Abimelech, is the product of Gideon's relationship with this Canaanite concubine. And Abimelech, after Gideon dies, is thinking, Dad rejected being king. I'm not so sure that was the right choice. So he goes to Shechem, to his relatives, because he's the only one of the sons that we know of who is part Canaanite. And he says to the people there, look, I'm one of you. We're family. Wouldn't it be better if I ruled over you rather than one of the 70 Israelite sons? You've got an in with me. We're blood brothers. So the people in Shechem say, yeah, okay, that sounds like a good idea. And so they give him money, and he hires a bunch of sketchy characters to be his crew. And the first thing he does is round up his 70 brothers. And it says in, let's see, verse 5, verse 5, he killed them on one stone, which basically means he killed them execution style. Rounded up the whole bunch of them and brought them out one at a time and killed them as, a parody of a sacrifice, actually. Only the youngest son managed to hide and get away. So Jotham, the youngest son, tells a parable. This is a classic Hebrew parable. It's down in verse 8. And in the Hebrew, I'm told that it actually starts with words that could be translated once upon a time. So, once upon a time, the trees went out to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my abundance by which the gods and men are honored and hold sway over the trees? What he's talking about is the olive oil that's used in sacred anointings. Basically the olive tree says, no, I've got God ordained work that I do. I don't need to be king. So in verse 10, the trees go to the fig tree, come and reign over us. But the fig tree says to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and hold sway over trees? I'm supposed to produce these beautiful figs. That's my job. So then the tree said to the vine, you come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I leave my wine that cheers God and man and go hold sway over trees? Oh, I'm making grapes that make glorious wine. Then all the trees said to the bramble, okay, this is, you know, a weed, basically, right? You come and reign over us. And the bramble says to the trees, okay, you know, and if this is good, you can rest in my shade, which is impossible. I mean, he's a weed on the ground. Trees aren't going to rest in his shade. But if things are bad, then the fire will come out of the bramble and devour even the most valuable trees, the cedars of Lebanon. So Jotham tells this parable, and clearly he's talking about Abimelech being the weed that is going to offer shade. It's just no. And so he's predicting that this is going to come to no good end. So here you go. Abimelech in verse 22 reigns for 3 years. And then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. And the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. I mean, these were rough and ready, reckless characters anyway. And so they rebel and they start causing all kinds of trouble. And then in verse 26, you get Gaal, the son of Ebed, who comes in and says, who wants to worship Abimelech? Who wants to follow his rule? None of us do. Why should we serve him? And basically says, okay, Abimelech, show me what you got. What are you going to do about it? And so they tell Abimelech about it. And Abimelech comes, the ruler of the city, rats out Gaal. And Abimelech comes, and there's this big ambush. And then he sets fire to the city, which, it fulfills the fable. And Abimelech burns down Shechem, kills the people. You can see this down in verse 45. And then he goes to the next town, and he's going to have his way with the next town. And a woman throws the smaller of the millstone pieces over the wall, and it hits Abimelech and kills him. And it's great shame that he's killed by a woman. So this is the story of Abimelech. And this is offered as further evidence that when Gideon made mistakes, it passed along to the generations, because this is a son of a union that God would not have endorsed. So that's kind of the PS on the story of Gideon. And if you look at the chart that we started with, the list of judges, you'll see that we're just about to the middle of the list. Because the next thing that happens is in chapter 10, you get two judges that we aren't told much about. After Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Puah, the son of Dodo. Don't you love that? I love it. Dodo, the son of Dodo, a man of Issachar. And he lived in Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim, and he judged Israel 23 years, and then he died and was buried in Shamir. That's all we know about Tola. Okay, and the next, after him arose Jair, the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years. And he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 cities called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Kamon. Okay, so we're halfway through the list of judges today. And so I want to ask you some questions. Now, we've talked about two of the most famous judges, Deborah and her general Barak, and Gideon and his amazing military exploits last week. So let's take a few minutes to kind of take stock on where we are. And I have three questions for you. Okay, here are the three questions. So be thinking. First, what do you observe about the people of the 12 tribes of Israel in the promised land? What do you observe about these people? Okay, then the second question that you can be cogitating on, what do you observe about the judges? And then finally, what do you observe about God through these stories? So we're just going to take stock here about halfway through. And we'll start with the first question. What do you observe about the people from these stories? Okay, if Lawrence said something, I didn't hear anything he said.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, we figured it out. So.
One more time. Not
Okay.
not the brightest bulb on the family tree.
Huh? Yeah. Yeah. It seems like the people keep making pretty rudimentary mistakes here. Others, other comments about the people.
The people was wanting a leader like we do. I'm comparing them to us. We need a leader. We need leaders.
Yeah.
Because I'm constantly praying for the leaders of this country, lawmakers. These people needed a leader, but they were just not taking. They wasn't. They were getting shafted with some of the leaders.
Mona, I think you're exactly right. They were looking there. You know what it made me think of is it made me think about Jesus saying, they're sheep lost looking for a shepherd. Um, yeah, they were um inclined to follow whoever spoke the loudest, looks like. Other comments about the people?
I think about when Moses was in charge, and then he assigned a certain number of people to listen to their grievances. It just seemed more organized. Right now, they just all seem like a bunch of hooligans that are just kind of doing whatever they want to do. They don't seem unified to me.
I think that's 100% true. The 12 tribes are 12 individual tribes, everybody going their own way, everybody looking out for themselves. Um, makes me think of that political assessment of a few years ago. Was it not in my backyard? It was, I'm looking out for me kind of thing.
Karen,
Yes.
it's Mona. Karen Farmer's sitting here by me. She said they were listening to fake news.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. Uh, which makes it more and more evident to me that we need to be striving to hear what God is saying to us. Um, okay, any other comments about the people? Okay, let's move on to the judges. What do you observe about the judges? Some of them we have a lot of information and some we have a little, but of the judges, what do you notice about them?
I've always been struck how Scripture reveals these moments of just great faith. I mean, it's which went through Gideon's story last week. Just imagining going up to that group of people, and there's stories, and then 10 minutes later, figuratively, they're off doing something really stupid, and I can really relate more to the latter than the first, but I think it's really neat that Scripture, that God records that for us, because I relate to it.
I do too, Dave. It's it's compressed in these stories into a few verses so that it's more obvious. In my life, it's spread over my lifetime, and it's not quite as obvious how vacillating I am. But yeah, human nature is such that the same person can show great faith and, as you say, great lack of intelligence in our choices.
Karen,
Yes,
didn't Gideon try to go after God's will with what he was doing?
he tried and he did. He shows some remarkable faith in the things that he does, and the men who followed him. I mean, that whole idea of just having a torch in one hand and a trumpet in the other, and then standing, against this huge army. It's just amazing. It's tremendous faith. Um, so yeah, Gideon did show a lot of faith, but then Gideon made some very poor choices as well. So we get both sides, and I think that's true of a lot of the people we read about in the Bible. Um, we're told about their faithfulness and we're told about their failures, which, as Dave says, is encouraging to me, uh, knowing from the inside my proclivities. Other comments about the judges?
Lest I be a hypocrite, I'll just say I'm not saying I do this myself, but because we know the rest of the story and we read in like when David was the king and he would go before the Lord and ask the Lord what to do. I'm just not getting a sense of that. I'm not getting a sense that they're going to God as leaders and saying, what should we do? They're just doing what they think they should do.
Yeah, yeah. I think that is a good assessment of the fundamental problem. They're turning to other things rather than to God. And in the beginning of the book of Judges, we saw them go to God and ask him, who's going to lead us? And God gave them a leader. And now we're not seeing that. We're only seeing that after years of subjugation, they'd finally cry out to God for his redemption. And even when they cry out to him, I mean, in the story that we read last week, he had to tell them what they were doing wrong. So the downward spiral is showing. Um, they not only aren't seeking God, they don't realize why these bad things are happening to them. So they've lost the understanding of the covenant that God made with them. We're told draw near to God and he will draw near to you. They're they're not doing that. Other comments about judges? Okay, let's move on to your observations about God through these stories. What do you observe about God?
I noticed a couple of things about God. In the Gideon story, Gideon did, in his own way, um, ask for God's guidance, and God was patient with him in his seemingly lack of faith. So God hung in there with him, and then used that opportunity to show Gideon that God was powerful. But then it just seems I'm not seeing a lot about God. So it's like he's just leaving them to their own defenses. He's letting them learn things the hard way. And if they want to do it on their own, oh, well, go for it. And then let's see how that turns out.
Yeah, that's one of the scariest things about God to me is, if I demand to do it my way, he lets me. Uh, that's scary.
Yes, it seems to me that God is very constant in all of this and consistent, story after story after story, um, which talks to my own problem is when the people are faithful to God, when they are not tied up with some idol or some crazy thing, he is consistent with them and they prosper. But God made a contract with every human being, and it is every human has a choice every day, and he doesn't violate that contract for anything. He stands by his covenant of individual choice, and we pay the price.
True, true. Yeah, God shows amazing constancy through all of this. Every time they call for his help, he responds. And he responds in really glorious ways. Um, but he does. He responds when they call every time. And I can imagine that I'd be pretty impatient by this point. Uh, I'd be pretty fed up with them. But God, as you say, stands by his covenant and he promises, you turn to me and follow my ways, and I'll take care of you. You turn away from me, and I'll hand you over to your enemies. I'll hand you over to what embattles you. Um, that's that he's amazingly constant, and that's amazingly scary when you think about it. Um, any other observations about God through these stories? Okay, well, I'll tell you the things that I jotted down um, about the people. I jotted down people are short-sighted. People turn to whatever seems to have the most immediate benefit. Um, the people in this instance thought that the various gods around them might have some payoff for them, and so they turned to those gods. And then they gradually lost their relationship with Jehovah God because you can't serve God and mammon, right? Uh, but they had a very short sighted approach, which, of course, makes me think about me uh, in all of this. But that short sighted view of what will benefit seems to be really pervasive through these stories. Okay, one observation that I wrote down about judges is judges, the people that God calls to be his redeemers of his people, are not perfect people. And when I wrote that down, I thought, oh, well, God doesn't have any options to choose perfect people because there are no perfect people. So God chooses imperfect people because those are the only ones available. And he chooses to work with imperfect people anyway. Um, he still invites people to help. He does not from heaven solve the problem of the Canaanites. He invites their participation. He calls them to partner with him. And he chooses imperfect people to do that, which that to me is such a fundamental truth about God through all time. Um, all of us are flawed, and God invites us to participate anyway. So I'm into talking about God now. I also notice in these stories that God can turn away any adversary, any scary circumstance. Think with me about this. The Canaanites with their chariots, remember the thing that was so scary about them is they were so mobile and so fast, and they could zip around in those chariots, and it was terrifying. And then God turns their chariots into their liability. He just eliminates their mobility and their speed. He strikes them at the very point that was the scariest in the circumstance. You get those chariots stuck in the mud, and then they're a liability instead of a benefit. And then there's a parallel with Gideon and God defeating the Midianites. Because the scary thing about the Midianites was the sheer numbers of them. Remember, they said it were like locusts, and they just covered the entire valley. And the text seems to indicate there were like 135,000 of them, just huge numbers. And so what does God do? God shows that small numbers can win. He turns that scary thing totally upside down. Gideon, you've got too many men. No, you've still got too many men. I can do this with 300 guys. Numbers don't matter. So it seems to me that God is amazingly creative and more than equal to anything that is scary to us. So we have some really encouraging portraits of God here. So let's see. Yeah, people are short-sighted. God uses imperfect people, and God can still overcome whatever scary thing confronts us. All still true, right? All still true. Okay. Now, chapter 10 ends with a description of the people. It says in verse 6, people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. They forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of the Philistines. For 18 years they oppressed the people. Okay, and then it says down in verse 9, Israel was severely distressed. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, saying, we've sinned against you because we've forsaken our God and served the Baals. All right, so there's an awareness anyway. And the Lord said to the people of Israel, did I not save you from the Egyptians and from the Amorites, from the Ammonites and from the Philistines? The Sidonians also, and the Amalekites and the Maonites oppressed you. You cried out, and I saved you. Yet you've forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods whom you've chosen. Let them save you in your time of distress. And the people of Israel said to the Lord, we've sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you, only please deliver us this day. So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord, and he became impatient over the misery of Israel. Then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead. And the people of Israel came together, and they encamped in Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, "Who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Who's going to help us? Who's going to be the Redeemer?" And on that cliffhanger, we end our lesson today. And next week, we'll pick up with a new judge and a new story of how God is faithful to his people. And we'll move on through the rest of the judges. So thank you for your comments today. You were very insightful and helpful. And I am really loving this study of the judges and all that I'm learning, not only about them, but about me. So I hope that's true for you. We'll stop here and start again next Sunday. Thank you.